I love classic books because of their beautiful prose, the character-driven story, the introspection, and their universal themes. But in addition to that, some of them feel like genuine, modern, binge-worthy dramas or thrillers. So we're gonna cover 7 books that still feel fresh, fun, readable, accessible, and dramatic. Hello and welcome to kaisquarters, my quarters. And today we are going to talk about 7 books, 7 classics that are full of murder, monsters, revenge, doom, love, ancient gods, anything you would expect from a more modern contemporary book, but that instead was written centuries or even millennia ago. These are books that have a beautiful prose, but that still feel very accessible, and that deal with universal themes, which in my opinion is the reason they became classics, and in some cases they were even the pioneers of some of the most well-known tropes nowadays that we see in films, in literature, and any other media really. And we're going to start with The Hound of the Baskervilles, one of the Sherlock Holmes books, written of course by Arthur Conan Doyle. Listen to the setup of this book. In the 17th century, centuries before the book takes place, a cruel and immoral man called Hugh Baskerville became infatuated with a young girl, so he kidnapped her and locked her up in his estate. The girl ended up escaping, but Hugh Baskerville swore that he would sell his soul to the devil if in return he could catch her. So he sets off to find her with his hounds. But later, he is found dead next to the girl, who is also dead, because Baskerville had been killed by a gigantic spectral black hound, and next to him the girl seemed to have died from fear. Since then, legend says that the hounds hunt this Baskerville family, bringing death and misfortune to its male heirs. So this is the setup to Arthur Conan Doyle's most gothic tale, in which Sherlock Holmes is called by the Baskerville family because the current owner of the estate has died, and next to him there are these animal marks that seem to come from a huge hound, right? And this is 2 centuries after the legend of the Baskerville Hound had started. What's fun about this book in comparison to the other Sherlock Holmes tales is that in this one, Watson is the one that starts the story. And of course, we would love to be Sherlock Holmes, but I think all of us would be Watson, trying to keep up with Sherlock, but not really having the genius and witty mind that almost seems supernatural that Sherlock has. So this time around, it is Watson's time to shine and to see if the plot behind all these killings is actually rational, or if this is the first time that we are facing a supernatural element. So of course we have a cursed family, a creepy moor, a mystery thriller with horror elements, and the prose feels as witty and honestly as modern as it has always felt by the hands of Arthur Conan Doyle. The suspense is delicious, the mystery starts immediately, and it is a page turner, because if you're anything like me, you're gonna try to keep on trying to guess what exactly is going on and try to come up with something that makes everything fit perfectly together, right? And in my opinion, it does have a satisfying conclusion to what I think is a pretty badass and genius story. The next book I will recommend is The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in the Mesopotamian times, which makes this the oldest book in the list. And it is basically as old as you can get, because it was written by the Sumerians, the first civilization ever known, in the 2000s before Christ. which makes this the original action hero story and the pioneer of so many tropes that you see nowadays. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh, the main character, is the strongest man alive, basically. Or that is until he hears that there is another man out there that is just as strong, if not stronger, than he is. So of course he sets up to find him. But what he doesn't expect is that he will find a new friendship in this man. A friendship like no other that is honestly, I think, deeply rooted in these ancient values of masculinity that have really changed over time. This masculinity from back then means that you will find no other partner in your life, no other companion than another man if you are a man. It's kind of funny because this is rooted in misogyny, because the explanation for that is that women were not considered to be equal to men, which meant that women were a male's companion, but in the sense of bearing children for them and bringing them descendants. And instead they would find an intellectual companion on men. So someone to talk openly with and even be vulnerable with. And back then this masculinity involved a lot of closeness and physical intimacy between the men, and a lot of flowery, over the top and epic conversations. And that is what we find in this story. But that is not all you find in the Epic of Gilgamesh, because bros will be bros, and so the two of them fight monsters, wrestle gods, and just try to prove who is stronger, right? The story also comes to a point where Gilgamesh tries to find a way to become immortal. And that is, in my opinion, where the universal themes start to really show up. At that point, the story really becomes introspective, and we hear a lot of gut-wrenching observations about life and death and loss. So it is emotional, it is raw, and it is, as the title says, very epic. Also, I don't know if it depends on the translation, but you would be surprised by how accessible the language is. I actually don't know if the Sumerians had lesser words in their vocabulary back then. It is very direct, straightforward, and yet it is very effective. Now we will travel forward 4,000 years, because it is time to mention the most modern of the 7 books in the list, but still a 20th century classic, and that would be And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is one of Agatha Christie's standalone novels that doesn't star Poirot, the detective, and instead it is about 10 strangers that end up on the same house, the same mansion, secluded on an island. They don't know each other, they don't seem to have anything in common, but they were all invited to this house. Only when they arrive, there is nobody there except for 2 servants. And when they go to their rooms, they see a poem in each room that narrates the way 10 people die, and they are 10, and even the way they will die. And this becomes very alarming when, unexpectedly for them, but not so much for us, they do start dying in the way the poem narrates. So of course it's pure tension, and nobody knows who to trust because they seem to be the only people on this island. So is one of them the killer? I would say And Then There Were None is the blueprint for modern thrillers. It feels like so many TV shows and films nowadays. And yet the plot is so perfect and so unique, and everything ties together so well. Agatha Christie is possibly the best at this. And one of her flaws sometimes is that there are too many red herrings in her books, But that is not the case in this one. The clues are there, and even if you don't care about trying to find the culprit, the pacing and the mystery and the modern style of writing will keep you hooked, absolutely. I was personally making notes who each character was and under what pretense did they come to this island, what was their job, and what is it that they had done in the past, what were their lives like. And as hooked as I was, I still could not guess the ending. So for a classic whodunit with a plot like no other, and then they were wrong. I think it is time now that we recommend a Greek play, a Greek tragedy, because there is nothing more over the top and badass than a Greek play. And that would be Oedipus Rex or Oedipus King. This is a story of Oedipus, a king that unwillingly fulfills a prophecy that relates to his father and his mother in a really traumatizing way. You may know what that prophecy is, even if you haven't read the book, because of the Oedipus complex, but I won't say anything just in case. So what I will say is that Oedipus searches for the murder of the previous king of the city that he rules in order to end a plague that is ravaging the city. And in doing so, a truth that he was unaware of comes to life with horrible consequences. So we have a prophecy, a murder mystery, and one of the most jaw-dropping twists of all time. This book is a very fast read because it's only like 80 pages or so, less than 100, and it's full of dramatic irony and it's very emotional and intense. In case you don't know, what categorizes a book as a Greek tragedy is that the main character, the hero of the story, has to end up in a twisted and tragic ending for him. But specifically, he has to bring that upon himself. That tragic ending has to be the conclusion of a set of webs that the actions of the hero set in motion and that lead us to this ending, whether the hero is aware of the consequences or not. So, for example, a Greek tragedy is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Because in that tale, Orpheus tries to drag Eurydice away from hell after she dies. And in order to do so, he makes a deal with Hades, the king of the underworld. And that deal is that he's not supposed to look back while they make their way back to Earth. Eurydice is behind him, and just as they are about to leave hell, he ends up looking behind him to check if she's following him or if instead it was all a trick. So of course that means that he brought that twisted and tragic ending upon himself. So that is to explain that you can expect something similar in Oedipus Rex or Oedipus King. So it is a dark, tragic storytelling with a language that feels very gut-wrenching, very punchy, and that you can imagine someone saying at the top of their lungs in a theater, and it would be one of the most intense and memorable times of your life. Oedipus has brilliant monologues that will generally stick with you. As for the fifth recommendation, it is time to bring up one of the classics of all classics, that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is a story that made me shed a single cinematic tear in so many occasions. And that is because of the main characters, which are Dr. Frankenstein and the creature, the creation. Frankenstein is a scientist that has this obsession in his mind about being able to create life from electricity. So he begins to gather pieces of dead bodies from their graves, which was something that some surgeons started doing back then, but it was really frowned upon. What we see now as a rule, which is scientists and medicine students studying with donated bodies, was back then considered a heretic practice, right? You were not supposed to mess with dead people. So you can see how this mission was sort of doomed from the start. And of course, Dr. Frankenstein succeeds. But the problem is that he hadn't thought about what to do after he succeeded. He was not ready to face the consequences of his actions and have to face this creature, have to face what he considers very hideous creation. He suddenly realizes that that was a mistake and leaves the creature on his own. He leaves immediately without giving any explanations to this new form of life, to this new, what I consider, and we consider reading, a person. So the creature is left without his creator, which brings him to this deep dive into philosophy and existentialism in the search for his purpose in life, because he doesn't feel like he has any. So there is this allegory about nihilism and the search for purpose when you feel like if there is a God, he has abandoned you. We feel for Dr. Frankenstein and his fear for what mankind can create, but we also fear for the creature, because we see that in a way he is like a baby. He's a newborn person, which means that he knows nothing of life and nobody is there to teach him about life. And that ends up taking him on a spiral of revenge in which you really do not want to take sides, because the characters feel real with their flaws, but also with their reasonings for the things they do. The monster turns out to be more thoughtful, tragic, and eloquent than even his creator. But the creator also teaches us a tale about consequences and responsibility for the actions that you do. It is very poetic and gripping and brooding, but it is also very readable. For the sixth recommendation, I think it is time to talk about Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Wuthering Heights is about a young woman and young man that grew up together almost as brother and sister, although he was adopted, but that certain circumstances cause that they are simply just doomed to never be together. It has honestly been discussed to death whether this is a romance story or not. And my take on it is that this is a story about two people that do love each other. It's just that some people don't know how to love in the right way, in a way that isn't toxic, that isn't obsessive, that isn't possessive and egocentrical. And some people happen to be like that. If you were to ask them, they would tell you that they love with their whole heart. And they would probably be right, but that still doesn't make things right. So this is not your average romance story, that's for sure. And instead it is more about generational trauma and how to break that cycle. Honestly, when I read this novel many years ago, I had never read something that wild written from a woman, especially because they weren't exactly allowed to write something that wasn't a romance. So I found it amazing how Emily Bronte wrote what was allowed back then, but made the main characters, the woman and the man, people that are a bit despisable that feel broken, that are not romantic, and that are just really unhinged. I genuinely kept my eyes wide open in shock reading the first half of the book, because I couldn't believe how much Heathcliff was sabotaging himself and his whole family and the person that he's supposed to really love and her own family as well. He doesn't know how to put a stop to things. It's never ending. And one of the things that I really, really loved and isn't usually discussed is the change in the point of view that happens exactly in the middle of the book, which is exactly the point where I thought that I couldn't stand more of this drama. Because the new perspective is from Catherine's daughter's point of view, and it is then when we see her trying to break that cycle of violence, that generational trauma. And it was such a breath of fresh air that I really needed. And it is then when we get my favorite romance in the book, and I really don't know why people don't discuss this romance. They only discuss Heathcliff's and Catherine's. I might talk about this later half of the book in another video, and how much it brings everything together and tells us the real message of the story. Just not today, not in this video, because we're not doing spoilers. So what I will say is that this is a story about anti-heroes with gothic, stormy vibes, and the story is really wild. And for the seventh and last recommendation, I have left the book that honestly brought this whole idea into my mind, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This story is the ultimate badass and epic revenge story. It is a story about Edmond Dantes, who is wrongly imprisoned for over a decade by the hands of three people that are acquaintances of him and have something to gain from him being out of the picture. There is the one man that wants to be in a relationship with Dante's girlfriend, the other man that wants Dante's job, and a third man that wants to make a career as a judge while protecting his family from secrets that Edmond Dantes knows. So when Dantes ends up leaving prison, he finds a treasure, and that helps him reinvent himself as a count. And with that power and a new identity that nobody knows about, he is set to destroy everyone who wronged him. Now, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, which is that this is over 1,200 pages. And yet, I started this book years ago, not knowing if I would pause it, if I would read it in different periods of my life, and I ended up reading it in weeks, which I'm a slow reader, guys. I had never read a classic that is so filled with so many adventure genre plots. This has intrigue, duels, disguises, ghost stories, romance, of course, revenge, and it has one of the most likable characters that I've read in my entire life, and I'm not being hyperbolic. Edmond Dantes is such a profound and lovable character, which is crazy for someone that has been wrong like that, and for someone that has set up to do so many awful things to people. You are with him all the way through the pain, through the rage, through the remorse, and every action, every paragraph, every sentence leads to an incredible ending that ties everything together in a way that I have never read. There is no loose plot in this chunk of a book. And on top of that, Edmund Dantes isn't the only amazing character in this book. The female characters are probably one of the best female characters that I have read written by a man, especially on that century. There are lots of characters and they all are incredibly memorable. They feel very different from one another and they have their dreams, their story, their conclusion, and there is sapphic and possibly trans representation, which is wild. So if you want the ultimate dramatic, badass story with intrigue and adventure and tears and laughter and just every emotion in the world, The Count of Monte Cristo is the book for you, for sure. So those are the 7 recommendations for books that are f***ing badass. If you like the video, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. And I talk about books. I like horror, I like literary fiction, I like classics, I like speculative fiction, weird lit, and I sometimes talk about video games and films as well. And if you have any more recommendations about atemporal, badass books, classic books, I would love to hear them. So you can write a comment as well. Anyway, that would be all. So thank you very much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye.